First of all, I want to say welcome on behalf of the No Tech Criminalization and Education Coalition, as well as the Edgelands Institute in supporting this Ending Youth Surveillance series. This series is really about bringing to light the emergent technologies that are existing across our educational ecosystems and resulting in the criminalization and push out of a digital push out of our young people, their families, and our communities. And so this has been a series that has been kicked off starting in 2024, where we highlight the voices of people that are activating, resisting, researching, reimagining what does it look like to end youth surveillance. And what we're going to do today is take a deep dive look into a geographic area and learn about what's happening there, how folks are organizing, what they've learned, and what we can take away from it. So I want to pass it off, first of all, to Chelsea. And you can take it from there, and I will transition to my next role.
Great, thanks, Marika, and thank you for holding down the slides for us. Should I maybe I'll wait until we're gonna do Sheen Square, and I'll do some tongue exercises. I guess I'm gonna make my job to introduce Ed because I think he's actually got the first slide that we assigned to each other. Uh, once we're there.
Sorry, they just disappeared. I will get them.
No worries. Well, we could get going. We get started. First thing we wanted to do is just introduce ourselves. I'm Ed. You see him pronouns. I'm a member of the Notice Coalition, one of the co-authors, along with the Dr. Chelsea Barabbas, for this report. And we're very excited that everyone is here tonight for this public launch of the Houston Diagnostic Report. Before we jump in, before we go through the report, the first thing that we really wanted to do was acknowledge and thank everyone who contributed to it and made this possible. So we've had significant research support in making this possible from Chanel Odike, from Christiana Thomas, and from Krupali Kumar. So thank you very much for everything you did to make this possible. And then this also wouldn't have been possible if we didn't have the support from the Edgelands Institute, from the Notice Coalition. Thank you, Marika and Clarence, and from the Surveillance Resistance Lab. Really appreciative of everything that y'all did to make this possible. I'm very excited to be in community with you tonight. And then when we're ready to go, I will hand it off to Chelsea.
Thanks, Marika. I think we can pop over to slide 3. So I'm gonna kick us off just one more. Thank you. We're just gonna kick us off by first just, grounding us in kind of, the title of the report and the place that this work has really been grounded, which is Houston, Texas. By talking a little bit about why Houston specifically and Texas generally are both really interesting and important places to be thinking about, and digging into what's happening with youth surveillance in public schools. Yeah, but the area that this report covers is a very large area. This is generally speaking, what we thought about here is this map of schools in the Houston metropolitan area. To drive from one tip of this to the other, it can easily take an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if you're going to go all the way down to Galveston. It's a huge area, and it's got some of the largest and the most diverse school districts in the country. But also in this area, we've included like suburban areas as well, and also some rural areas within this broader kind of like Houston, Galveston metropolitan area. And each of those spaces has some really interesting stuff going on. one of the reasons we wanted to think about this and how it might connect to larger conversations about what's going on across the country is that Houston and Texas more generally, because it's such a large market, often shapes some trends and patterns you see with school and educational policy, just generally speaking. So, for example, because Texas is such a large market for things like textbooks, their purchasing decisions and what types of textbooks they choose and procure, what's in those curricula can shape what options other smaller markets, other states, and local school districts have available to them. And it's similarly true for things like ed tech and surveillance technology as well. And we've seen that as different laws get passed, for example, in Texas, mandating things like more armed security guards or more armed security personnel, school hardening efforts and things like that, companies across the country are angling to serve that market and roll things out here that end up going to other places in the country as well. So we think of Houston as this really interesting place and really important in and of itself locally with everything that's going on, and also a place that we can learn from to kind of see what's on the horizon for other places or other patterns to look for across the country. So yeah, I actually think you can go ahead and go to the next slide. That's pretty much what I had. I forgot I put another slide in here. I put one other slide. I'll just briefly say there are also people like this. This is the former like security czar down in Texas City, which is in the southwestern tip of kind of the area we covered in Galveston County. He had a $10 million budget to up the security in that small school district after the Santa Fe High School shooting in 2018. And these people are also very prominent in also kind of like national lobbying groups and talking with Congress people about what needs to happen to keep kids safe locally in Texas, but nationally in this broader conversation. So that's what this slide's about. And I will go ahead and pass it over to Ed to break us down through what our agenda is looking like for tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Chelsea. So, as we jumped in and did started to think about what this research would look like, I think what Chelsea outlined in terms of this backdrop of Texas, why Texas matters, and its sort of outsized influence in terms of shaping public education across the country, we decided we wanted to examine how Texas was specifically shaping the use of digital tech in public schools by focusing on Houston, really understanding what was happening in Houston. So in our research, we documented the landscape of tech that is in use in Houston public schools, how these technologies are being used, and of course, what their impacts are in the schools and the districts across the city. And so through this research, we found 3 key issue areas or themes that kind of rose to the top that became evident fairly quickly. And in the report, we detail these themes using 4 different case studies. And so the themes that you see on the screen, the first one being protection at what cost, security against the backdrop of punishment in Texas schools. And we explore this by examining the impacts of vape detection sensors and ShotSpotter. The second theme, safe spaces for whom? Schools as a site of America's culture wars. We explored this by examining the use of web filters and student activity monitoring programs in the schools. And the third theme, no teacher, no problem, transforming educators into contingent labor. We explore this by examining the use of virtual teaching services in the Houston Independent School District. In a few minutes, we'll spend some time reviewing each of these case studies and these themes more in depth, but sort of more surface level generally. In our research, we found that digital technologies are transforming how Houston area schools operate and how education is delivered, especially as more of these tools are quietly creeping into every aspect of students' lives, of teachers' lives, and administrators' lives. What we found in our research is that whether a technology is adopted in the name of student safety or improved classroom instruction, digital tools are creating more punitive conditions for students and teachers and enabling corporate ed tech vendors to have more power and control over how schools and classrooms operate. While these technologies are often promoted as ways to improve the safety and operational efficiency of schools, our research reveals that they frequently foster punitive learning environments that disproportionately impact marginalized students, including LGBTQ+ students, disabled students, as well as students of color. And to date, this is probably not a surprise to anyone here, there's little evidence to demonstrate that student surveillance is actually effective in enhancing school safety and student well-being. At the same time, there's growing public concern around the potential for such technologies to perpetuate long-standing inequalities in the classroom and create environments that make it hard for students to thrive. These new digital technologies tend to be more behind the scenes than prior school security or curricular interventions. District and government leaders are often making decisions regarding how technologies are implemented with little or no input from students, parents, or teachers. So those who have to bear the consequences of tech's impact on public education in Houston often have little power to determine the role of technology in their education. And this undermines the quality of public education and erodes democratic values. That being said, hope is not lost. Hope is a discipline. And I'm going to hand it over to Chelsea to say more about why we can and should be hopeful.
What a great transition. Yeah, I think this report has been really fun to write and tracking these trends and what's happening. But we were really, the most life-giving part of this report was really talking to the people who have been on the front lines of like uncovering what's happening and demanding a different vision for the role, like what safety, what well-being looks like in school settings and the appropriate role of technology in that. So we really want to emphasize that none of the trends we outlined in the report are inevitable, and give very specific and concrete and inspiring examples of people who have been pushing the boundaries of what's possible and really seeding a brighter vision. And they will be our guest speakers for tonight. Here are pictures of a couple of the organizations who will be talking to Pure Justice, who was an essential member of the RISE Coalition, students from Katy ISD here, and members of the SEAT, Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. Shout out to y'all. So I'm so excited that y'all are all here and that we're all get to be in the same room together. And we're excited to hear from you tonight and what's going on. So I'll pass it back over to you, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you. So for the rest of tonight, we're going to take some time to go through each of these case studies and hear from, as Chelsea said, from folks on the ground in Houston that are leading this work. And then we're going to invite Cynthia Conti-Cook from the Surveillance Resistance Lab to talk a little bit more about why this research matters now specifically. And then we're going to close and have some time for questions. So with that, I will hand it back to Chelsea for our first case study on vape detection sensors.
Okay. So Houston area schools have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars on vape detectors in an attempt to curb vaping on campus. Our research has revealed that these devices intensify the criminalization of this public health problem by funneling more kids out of the classroom and into the criminal legal system. And we're here today with Krupali Kumar, who's going to talk to us a little bit about that. Krupali is a former research assistant for the Edgelands Institute and for this report. She's also the co-founder of the Finish the 5 campaign, which aims to end the remaining 5 juvenile detention centers in the state of Texas. And she's also the co-founder of the Austin Liberation Youth Movement, which is a youth-led organization that's fighting to dismantle carceral systems in Texas. So thank you so much for being with us, Krupali. We are excited to have you here. And I know that Finish the 5 has been doing a lot of work around this issue of vaping. And so I wanted to ask you, how would you describe vape detectors as fitting in to the overall approach that Texas officials have taken to addressing this issue of teen vaping?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to see a lot of you again and to talk about a lot of this research that has been done over the summer. It was really an amazing experience working with Ed, Chelsea, Chinello, Cameron, Christiana on this work and like understanding how technology is affecting students and other young people in our state. In terms of the approach that the Texas legislature is taking and the state of Texas in general is taking on vaping is a very punitive approach. So vaping has been identified as one of the leading public health crises, not just in Texas, but also throughout the country. And so it certainly is an issue that needs to be addressed and that needs a lot of intervention. However, one way that the state of Texas is dealing with it is through implementing vape detecting technology in schools. And this has started in 3 independent school districts throughout Houston. And so what this technology does is it detects aerosol emissions in the air, in the atmosphere, and it will alert school authorities that there's been some violation, that like a student has been vaping. And so there's a lot of concerns with this. One is that a privacy concern, because a lot of these technologies are in areas where students technically would go to more private areas to vape, and so that might be like a bathroom or other private areas. And so having technology in those areas does lead to privacy concerns. I think the bigger issue is really about the effectiveness of the technology, and of course the concern that it leads to more exposure to the carceral system. So there's two, I think, causes for why why Texas has been using this technology so much. First is that it's a very profitable technology. A lot of school districts in Houston have contracts with companies that create this technology, and these are companies that are not at all invested in like public health. They really don't understand how to address these issues from a public health standpoint. So a lot of how we're dealing with the public health issue is through companies that are invested in creating technology that is basically surveillance technology. So there's that in and of itself is very ineffective. A lot of Houston officials and law enforcement officials have also said that the reason that vape detecting technology is so common, and like why they choose to use it, is because it fits the deterrence over detection approach, meaning that this technology is supposed to help deter kids from vaping instead of just detecting whether or not they're vaping. But obviously there's a lot of evidence to show that students don't actually stop vaping if they're detected to have been vaping. So that brings us to the point of what is the effectiveness of this technology and how do people feel about it? So one way we can conceptualize the problem is in the academic year 2023 to 2024, there were 640 students in Houston ISD that were sent to alternative education programs for vaping. And so Texas has passed two laws, HB 114 in recent years, which would place students in disciplinary alternative education programs if they're caught possessing an e-cigarette or a vape. And there's also laws that would result in a felony charge or offense if a student is found in possession of an e-cigarette or a device that would allow them to vape THC, which is essentially marijuana. So that's a felony offense. So these are really, really significant offenses for such a common and minor infraction, and something that a lot of students do. I mean, I went to a high school where this was really common. It is very common, and it does need to be addressed, but it is unfortunately being addressed in a very punitive way. On the topic of how this is still affecting our state, recently, or this upcoming week on Tuesday, the legislature will be having a testimony for HB 6, House Bill 6, which is essentially going to enhance the school to prison pipeline. So that includes issues of vaping. And so there's a hearing set for Tuesday, and we have folks on this call from our coalition who I'm sure can also add more information in the chat about how to testify for that. But if folks in this call are able to mobilize and testify on that issue against this bill, that would be a really great way to push back on a lot of like the state's approach to making this very punitive. So I will also try to share more information about the testimony in a second, but I just wanted to highlight that there are still bills actively being passed right now that are trying to continue criminalizing vaping and students and enhance the school to prison pipeline.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Krupali. And please, yeah, do send that information. I'd be really keen to check it out. I'm going to hand this over now to Chinelo Dike to introduce us to our case study on web filters and student activity monitoring.
Hi, y'all. Let me know if you guys can't hear me, if there's loud noises. I'm right by my window. But yeah, I'm excited to introduce the next two people we'll be interviewing. So web filters. So Due to an outdated federal law, most public schools use web filters to track student browsing history and block access to content online. Although web filters are marketed as a means of protecting kids from inappropriate and harmful websites, they often create a digital landscape that's riddled with arbitrary roadblocks. Web filters just don't screen content, they systematically cut students off from essential resources, creating invisible barriers to learning, health, and well-being. So again, I'm excited to introduce Cameron Samuels and Oyendamola Akintola, student organizers from the youth-led advocacy group SEAT, or Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. SEAT is a movement of young people that seeks to normalize the leadership of students in educational policymaking, and they have worked extensively on issues related to censorship and youth surveillance. As we discussed, web filters are discussed as an apolitical technology, but you guys have been very clear that they aren't. My first question for y'all is if y'all could tell us a little bit more about how web filters are political.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nello. So in my experience in KDIST, I knew that web filters were something that was every day. We had web filters in school since elementary school. Everyone knew about them because we couldn't access entertainment. We couldn't access cool math games. We couldn't access YouTube, right? We want to have fun at school, but we couldn't access that. But nobody really saw it as a means to enforce censorship or a means to enforce some political views or authority over students in a way that could be really adverse to our rights and our well-being. And so that was when I noticed my freshman year of high school, years after elementary school, when I found out about this in the first place. I was in high school when I tried accessing LGBTQ websites. So it was those very websites to see a category, not entertainment, not games, not whatever other categories the internet filter had, but that this particular category said alternative sexual lifestyles, GLBT. I knew that was just something that really made me feel ick. It made me feel just without any words, right? I was speechless in that moment. I knew that this wasn't just something that, yeah, it doesn't even mean anything. This is something that was just arbitrary. The school district somehow thought that LGBTQ people were alternative to the norm, that they were inherently sexual, and that this was a lifestyle choice that we make. And I knew that hurt me. I was a student trying to figure out my queer identity. I knew I was different. I was navigating that. And instead, my school district wasn't allowing me to access the very resources or information, a news source, The Advocate, or the Trevor Project, a suicide prevention lifeline. I couldn't access these websites that could have helped me in a life or death situation, or just really will show me what possibilities are in the world. Just give me that right to discover, to explore, to find myself, to empathize with others, to have access to public information that should be accessible to everyone. But instead, my school district blocked this. And so I saw this as a civil rights issue. This wasn't just blocking entertainment. No, this was what I believed, whether law says it or not. I mean, is a class of people that should be protected, that should be free from discrimination. And so in that moment, I knew something had to change, that this was political.
Yes, I'm just gonna bounce off of what Cameron said. I was gonna say, web filters were always political at the point in which they censored student views and identity. And I think Cameron already gave a great example on how web filters disproportionately affect student identities, i.e. LGBTQ plus resources. And even in my experience in my district, we had a lot of censorship with, progressive ideals, i.e. Or doing research about Black history. I wasn't able to access a lot of website that was supposed to help me with that. A lot of Black history, obviously, is something very important to a lot of people's identities, and it's not something that should be getting restricted because maybe it's controversial or for whatever reason. But that's what we see is the justification for having web web filters on student identity. And it's very dangerous. And I think it's always been political at the point in which we censor student views, identity, and opinions.
Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, I honestly, I even remember the day that they blocked Cool Math Games. So for them to just, use web filters as blocking simple things like that to more extreme stuff is just bizarre. So that kind of goes into my second question, my second and final question for y'all. So what does this tell us about the political nature of all tech used in schools?
Tech is an infrastructure. Tech is something that exists around us. I mean, this is our new normal. We have tech around us, and so it can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It's a tool. It's a system. And so in schools, I know that many have increased their surveillance, their authority over students, whether it's censorship like this, denying students access from resources that could really save our lives, or if it's tracking students like in KDISD with digital bathroom passes, where there's data on what time and how long students are using the bathrooms and which bathrooms they go to. I mean, that is a concern that should be private. There shouldn't be a huge database of details about students using the bathroom like that. And this is a bodily function we all have. And there could be a plethora of reasons why a student could be using a bathroom more often than others. There are a plethora of reasons for that, but the only reason they can cite as the reason for this would be, classroom distraction, or could be vaping in bathrooms. So it all ties together as we're talking about in this webinar. This is all part of this one sort of just, it's all connected. And it's really problematic to see that in an age of technology where we could be using this for good, using technological advancement to advance our nation and bring us together and advance society and the limits of our possibility and our pursuit of knowledge and just our collective sense of humanity. But instead, it's mostly being used for situations like these to deny, to block, and to deprive.
Yes. Again, bouncing off of what Cameron said, technology is never neutral. It reflects the values of the people or the institution that create and implement this. All the examples that Cameron is talking about at districts like KDISD, monitoring when you go to the restroom, all of this is always about student control. It's never about empowerment. That's how we see technology being used in schools, i.e. with the example of web filters. It's just a way of controlling student privacy, not always about empowerment. So the way technology is being used at school can and is deeply political at the point at which it affects the way students are able to express themselves again, be able to express their ideals again, be able to see themselves in social media or technology again. So yes, technology is never neutral. It's always a reflection of the values of institutions that create and implement it to begin with.
Thank you guys for sharing your knowledge and your experiences on these issues. We really appreciate it. I guess I can pass it on to Ed to hit into our third case study.
Thank you, Chinello, and thank you for the clear articulation of how technology is never neutral. It's important. Yeah, we're gonna transition now to talk about ShotSpotter. In 2022, the Houston City Council signed a 5-year, multi-million-dollar contract for ShotSpotter, a technology that uses audio sensors to detect gunshots, or at least the company claims that's what they do. And in 2024, it was revealed that the Houston Police Department installed ShotSpotter microphones on or near 65 schools in 3 Houston area school districts, the Spring Branch District, Aldine, and the Houston ISD. Our report looks at the ways in which the placement of ShotSpotter in and around schools creates a web of police surveillance that is used to justify ongoing police presence in hyper-policed locales. And so we're here today with Roshan C. Evans, co-founder and organizing director for Pure Justice, a grassroots organization which successfully advocated for the end of Houston's ShotSpotter contract in 2024. Congrats. Shout out to you, Roshan. Big deal. It's a big deal. So question for you about ShotSpotter. So far, we've been discussing technologies in schools and their impact on young people. Why do you think it's important to include ShotSpotter, which isn't inside of a school building, in this discussion?
Thank you for having me. Excuse my voice, everybody. I am a little under the weather. But so you have different types of surveillance systems, and depending on where you are, what area you're in, the surveillance system could be a little bit more severe than other districts' surveillance systems. Now, if you are coming from an area of a space that is lacking economic support or maybe a little impoverished, the surveillance that they will have on you will be quite different than if you're like in the suburbs. These systems that they are putting in place is expanding the doors of the school to prison pipeline, and you are going from a school surveillance system that's trying to figure out how do I um, take you to that school to prison pipeline to leaving into your community, and you got the same problem. For those of you who do not know what ShotSpotter is, and maybe you all know what it is, but ShotSpotter is a uh, system that has changed its name to Sound Thinking, that surveils particular areas that come from black and brown or impoverished spaces, to where supposedly if shots are fired, it would legally give law enforcement the opportunity to stop and frisk you. And if you don't know what stop and frisk is, it was outlawed in 2010 because law enforcement was jumping out of vehicles and checking people that are minorities or look like they come from impoverished spaces. And this will be the first initiation to a possible incarceration that has that revolving door of a never ending cycle of the system for many. So we need to um, include ShotSpotter in this because it's another tool of suppression. And like Cameron was saying, how we need to spend our resources, like we literally need to be sitting up here spending resources to figure out how do we liberate people and get them the things that they need to survive, instead of trying to figure out how to criminalize people because they are in fact trying to figure out who they are, the things they need to do for themselves to get to the next level, or trying to figure out how do they criminalize people who basically is crying out for the resources they need just so they can, survive like every other person around outside of their community. So the school surveillance as well as ShotSpotter, like we're spending way too much money into these programs. I believe Chelsea said at the beginning of this call that in Galveston they had $10 million budget for surveillance. Now, $10 million is a lot of money. We spent millions of dollars on ShotSpotter. It's a lot of money, but yet it's not enough for everything that we need in particular communities for our liberation, but it's a start. So while we are sitting up here trying to figure out how we can spend as much money as we can every second we get to figure out how to incarcerate as many people from particular spaces as we can, we need to be taking the taxpayer dollars that come from the the hardest working class that have the fewest amount of dollars in their households and trying to figure out how do we get this money back into the households of the people who need instead of incarcerating them because of their vulnerabilities or them trying to figure out certain things in life to get to the next level. This is why it's important that we include ShotSpotter as well, because let me say this: surveillance in school, especially the severe surveillance and ShotSpotter, is not about safety. All of this is reactionary. None of it is proactive. Now, if the teachers in the school want to be proactive to figure out how do they create a safer space for the students, then one, instead of surveillance, they need to be getting to know their students. They need to be having conversations with the students and building relationships with the students. And the students will tell you what's happening, when it's happening, how it's happening. And you could be that voice of diffusion if there is a problem, instead of waiting on something to happen to go back and review a tape. So surveillance in schools, ShotSpotter. If we use our money in better ways as far as addressing the needs of the people, instead of trying to figure out again how to incarcerate or punish, then our schools will be safer, our communities will be safer, our neighborhoods will be safer, and we all will feel so much better.
Thank you, Roshan. Thank you. And thank you for all your leadership in getting that contract canceled. Really, much respect.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And with that, I would like to introduce Christiana Thomas to take us through to the last case study.
Hi, wait, can everyone hear me? Okay. So I'm Christiana, and I'm going to introduce us to this other issue we've been talking about, which is the HISD takeover. So as school districts contend with this widespread teacher shortage, we see virtual teaching services have become rapidly a growing industry. So rather than trying to alleviate these structural problems due to teacher shortages, virtual teaching services make it hard to then now also foster a strong sense of community within schools and then chip away at the value of public education as a public good, and then also make it hard for students to generally be connected to institutions that keep them tethered. So in our report, we explore how virtual teaching platforms are likely to become more widespread in Texas as the struggle to privatize public schools escalates. Drawing from the interviews of teachers, parents, and students in the Houston Independent School District, we explored the ways that heightened surveillance and punitive classroom policies have created what many have described as prison-like environments in HISD, as well as to create the conditions necessary for rapid expansion of these new corporate technologies like virtual teaching platforms. So we're here to introduce Jeremy Eugene. So Jeremy is a teacher, organizer, writer, education activist. They work with CVPE and also witness firsthand the state takeover effects of Houston public schools, including the dismantling of public education systems and its impact on teachers and students. So I'm just going to kind of jump into these questions. So as an educator who works closely with current and former teachers from HISD in CVPE, which is Community Voice Public Schools, which is a community-based nonprofit uniting parents, educators, students, and community members to advocate for public schools in Houston. Can you tell us a bit about the experiences teachers are having being pushed out of classrooms under the takeover?
Yes, thank you for that introduction, Christiana. And yes, my name is Jeremy Eugene. I'm filling in for Reese Carr, who unfortunately couldn't make it. Reese was teaching in HISD and is a good friend of mine and has spoken to me a lot about the experiences that teachers are going through, dealing with surveillance, dealing with micromanaging. And one of the biggest things that they're dealing with is cameras, and what moves they need to make, how they can navigate there being cameras in their classrooms, which has just been started because of the beginning of the takeover. They had implemented cameras that would be facing the students, and were supposed to have these on all the time. And this was done so that they could, administrators could check up on teachers, have easy access to what they would say is coach. But what many people realized was an opportunity to reprimand teachers, and to create the sort of work environment that they would not want to go to. And this is because they, Houston ISD, has systems in place that usually protects teachers, or they had systems in place that would usually protect teachers. But when the superintendent, who's now in, Mr. Miles, decided that he was going to lead this takeover effort, he came in with a certain set of experiences from owning a charter school before all of this happened. And the technologies that you can use in a charter school, the technologies that it makes sense to use in a charter school, are not necessarily going to be the same things that it makes sense to use in a public school. And what we're dealing with in a charter school are oftentimes you're going to have inexperienced teachers, and they're going to be ascending the network very rapidly. And in those circumstances, it almost makes sense to surveil people more regularly, and to have very rigid guidelines for what you want to do, just because the teachers that you're working with might not know the best strategies or the best ways to approach a classroom and to handle particular discipline problems. But what ended up happening is that Mike Miles knows that there's this tool that he has at his disposal, these cameras. And when you only have a hammer, everything that looks like a nail. So if I have these cameras that I can buy, and I can put in these classrooms, then we'll create circumstances where there can be discipline problems. It's okay if we do things like having cones in the classroom, like restricting the amount of authority that teachers have, restricting the flexibility that they have in their lessons. These are things that teachers who are experienced know is going to upset the students, is going to make their learning environment stifle it, and that it's honestly not even good for test scores. It's not even good for the particular thing that is the measure for how we got into this problem in the first place. However, if you have these tools at your disposal, then you feel like you can navigate around having to contend with experienced teachers that are usually the sorts of people that you want to encourage to stay in public schools. And so rather, because of this technology, it pushed the district in a direction that made it seem okay to continue surveillance and to ramp it up. What we've seen since these cameras were installed is also that teachers are being asked to man metal detectors, which they had not done before. They are being asked to have students use an app to track them, and they had not been doing that before either. And these things all cost quite a lot of money. But these are the measures that you end up having to take if the policies that you have is going to turn over almost all of your staff all the time. And that's the situation that HISD is in right now.
Okay, so then in response to these teachers either being pushed out or a lack of funds, given that you're allocating it to more like surveillance technologies, do you see virtual teaching services as a necessary stopgap or as something that is undermining the profession, or do you think it's something else?
That's a good question. I taught online for a couple of years through this company named K-12, and there is, I'll just say, far less that you can do, far less that you end up learning when you're teaching online, as opposed to when you're teaching in person. It's a very different experience, and I bring this up because HISD has a policy that they are trying to continue and to get off the ground, which is 2 classrooms, 1 teacher, right? Where not only do you not need experienced teachers, You can have like a teacher that's teaching a lesson to one group of students and then also another group of students. And so it ends up, as our speakers were saying, being a cost-cutting measure, but at what cost? You're trading one thing for another. You're trading the experiences that kids will enjoy, and paying teachers well to create an environment where staff enjoys this, for an environment where taxpayer money is being spent on things that nobody wants or needs.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that. I also just think that's interesting because I know that a lot of those policies are focused on teachers interacting directly with students. So it seems pretty counterintuitive to then remove that capacity given that you're teaching to a wide audience instead of an actual space. But I want to pass it over to over to everyone else. I think we have a closing reflection with Conti, right?
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm happy to add a few thoughts. I'll introduce myself first, I suppose. I am Cynthia Conti Cook, and I'm the Director of Research and Policy at the Surveillance Resistance Lab. Perhaps relevant to you all, I'm on the AI Advisory Committee of the American Association of University Professors, and we also provide TA and technical assistance and trainings, consulting, etc., to unions and to members of unions like UTLA. We really like working with public sector unions like UTLA that famously won not just power for the teachers and power for the workers, but used their power to, during the first administration, protect their students from ICE in the schools. We are also training and consulting with many different types of public sector workers to help them understand why the new technology that's coming into public sector areas is not just about privacy, as I think, Cameron, you said earlier, that the concerns were not just about privacy, but also about power, which is something that we say at the surveillance lab quite often. We try to understand the ways that these new technologies are actually shifting power and turning the spaces where we did have collective power together into spaces where it's harder to connect and hold trusted relationships together. And this is really important at this moment more than ever. But I think also what you all showed today is that as much as schools are absolutely a sandbox for surveillance experiments, they are, brought in with all the efficiency and claims to efficacy language, but really they are extractive. At the same time that they are absolutely being targeted and used as sandboxes for surveillance, I think you all have shown that they can also be sandboxes for surveillance resistance. Your research and your drilling down into how there are both corporate and state profit and control mechanisms at play that is preying off of students at this point is so important, not just because it's important to protect our schools, it absolutely is, but also because you all are also preparing yourselves for going out into the world where there are also very similar surveillance systems sort of surrounding us at increasing rates. So vape detection is starting off in schools, but it's coming to transit. Web filtering started and content moderation started in schools, but we see the age verification bills that are already trying to gatekeep and block access to more young people being able to use the web even outside of schools with the freedom that they deserve. And in the context of the virtual teachers, we also see the similarity that the public sector is now also they're seeking to automate. And so in every way that you all have explored in this report, how schools are testing grounds for surveillance, you have also just demonstrated how schools can also be testing grounds for resisting and researching surveillance and pushing back against this automated authoritarian government and system of governance that we are facing. And I thank you all for your work and your research. Fantastic. Thank you. I pass it back to you, Chelsea.
Thank you so much for joining us, Conti, and for zooming us back out to the big picture. It's been so great to work with all of you and to bring these amazing communities and networks together. There are ways to contact and reach out to each of the organizations who had a significant role in producing this report here. I encourage you to check out everybody's website. Everybody's got really important learning material here, as well as ways you can join newsletters, mailing lists, speaker series, and the like. In the remaining time we have, we just wanted to open it up for questions and discussion. We've got about 6 minutes, and we'd invite people to share thoughts or offer up questions to anybody who spoke.
Chelsea, this is Tammy Campbell. My question is for the lobbying on Tuesday. Do they have something in place to request a diversion program that I've been pushing, like a diversion for DWI for first-time offenders, and Chinola addressed it earlier in reference to this need. It is a epidemic, and it is of course a health issue, and so does anyone have anything in place where they're going to be specifically requesting a diversion program?
I know Krupali had to hop off. I don't know if anybody else from Finish the Five or Austin Liberation Youth Movement's here who'd want to speak to that. Or anybody else?
I'm so sorry. I had to step out for a second. Can you repeat the question? I'm with the Finish the Five.
Thank you. This is, as I indicated earlier, Tammy Campbell, a fellow. My question is, have you included a request for a diversion program, just like a diversion program with DWI? It is a health issue that needs to be addressed rather than just rather than the punitive component of it, to have where they can provide, because it's an addiction, provide the person that is vaping, that is being punished for vaping.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes, some type of a diversion program to assist them.
Yes, ma'am. We have actually tried to just emphasize on the educational purposes because the kids really don't understand. Right now, they do have a DEA program, but it just separates them from the actual learning institute. It takes them to like a different academy place where they have to learn by themselves on a computer. And then they also, and the way that it works is they get like double punished in the public school system right now because you have to go to that DAEP. First, you get suspended, then you go to DAEP for 30, 60, or 90 days, but you also have to go through the court system of that county. So that's the problem, is that Texas is over penalizing these kids without even acknowledging the fact about their education or their trauma or anything like that. And there's actually been incidences where the kids are on like the 504 plan or like a special education plan where they're already struggling with just trying to get by, especially after the COVID effect where everyone was kind of managing their own mental health needs. And they're just very like blinders to it. Like even I've had conversations with administrations and they literally are like, this is just the law, black and white. They don't even try to accommodate the kids at all. And we've had to have those talks and it's just been really hard. I do feel like now in legislation in Texas, they are starting to finally recognize the mental health aspect of things because there was an interim about the health of youth youth health and safety. And in that report, it actually came out how affected kids were mentally and how those needs were not being met. And since that report came out, we have been able to get people to listen, but it hasn't changed what's been going on in the public education. And ironically, the only bill that's kind of addressing the vaping situation a little bit the way we'd like is this HB6, but the HB6 that's being passed by Leach is also the one that we have to oppose because it is also creating a more diverse prison to pipeline situation because now they're trying to actually involve the juvenile justice system. So it's like they give us an inch and then they take a mile. So I understand. I totally agree that education and actually getting to the root of the problem is what needs to happen, which is kind of why we, as Finish the Five, we are trying to get this bill passed. It's SB 661 to create an Office of Youth Health and Safety under HHSC, to where it's not under the punitive law at all. We're actually trying to see where the root causes are and what needs are not being met in the community and what resources the kids need to be successful. So, if you want to be a part of that, join us.
Uh, uh, which legislator are you targeting? Are you targeting a specific one that you feel that would lend an ear and create that bill and push it?
So right now, for the bill for the office that we're trying to create, we actually have it in the House and in the Senate. The Senate is being carried by West, and in the House, it's being carried by Tellerico. Both of them have been very good with reform, and Tellerico is like a champion for the juvenile justice realm and and education. As far as like the bad bills, like the one that HB6, I'm actually really sad that Leach is the one carrying it because he's usually a pretty good champion too when it comes to just what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. But it's also one of those political things where unfortunately the narrative of these kids in this generation are just outlandish and monsters and like no one can control them. Like that narrative has been very loud. And unfortunately, the Republicans and the more conservative, that's what they want to hear. And they want to be able to punish them more, even though that's not the answer.
For the punitive component of it, and also you're addressing the economic component of it when you're going to court, which many and the parents, the entire family is suffering because the court fees and all of that. So when you're getting into that diversion aspect of it, rather than going to court and having to pay those fees when you're going through training, just as I said, just like with a DWI, you don't have to pay for the court fees and all of that if you go into a diversion program. So how
Miss
my
Tam,
question? Yeah.
Miss Tammy, I want to thank you for bringing light to this critical question, but we are about to wrap up, and I wanted to just
Okay.
ask if any other folks had a question that we can touch on quickly before we thank you all for being a part of this process. Is there one other person or another question that we have out there?
I don't have a question. I just want to thank you all for this report. Marika, I got to see you present at DSC National, which alerted me to some of the tech issues. And as I began to come back to California, I work with a lot of parents. And so we began to see these things beginning to pop up. And so I just want to say thank you so much. This really helps us in our work, especially around teachers being asked to participate in this so we can find more allies in the work. But thank you all so much. This was really helpful. I appreciate it.
Well, what a lovely way to wrap up. Well, thank you, Ursula. And I want to thank all of our speakers. One of the goals of our series, Ending Youth Surveillance, is to really be able to go deep and connect with folks on the ground that are experiencing it, navigating, organizing against it, and actually reimagining what else they'd like to see. And so I just want us all to really thank our broad panel of speakers today who are doing the work in Texas. Thank you. I want to thank the Edgelands Institute for the support they're providing for many of this project on the ground and supporting the people that are doing the research and the work. I want to thank the No Data About Us Without Us Fellowship and with the Notice Coalition. Many of our fellows are a part of this project. And so we're bridging this work because collaboration, partnership, and cooperation is how we address that, to your point, DSC California. Ed, Conti, and Chelsea, thank you all for the work that you put in coordinating and writing and editing and doing all those pieces. And I also want to make a real quick plug. So this was a hyper focus down in Houston, knowing that it informs the rest of us around the country. But on March 20th, next week, we are actually going to have Dr. Roderick Crooks come in, and we're going to go back up. We're going to zoom back out and look at access is captured and really talk about the impact of education technologies, many of them that were discussed today, about their impact on racial justice and racial equity, because we're still using those words. And so if you haven't already, please check it out. March 20th, same time. It'll be an hour. We get in, we get out, and we share community with each other. So I want to say we went 5 minutes over, but this information was so rich. I'm satisfied and ready to say goodnight to you all. Thank you again. Ending Youth Surveillance, check us out at Notice coalition.org or something like that. We'll follow up. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Thank you, all our speakers and our guests.
Bye. Thank you too.
Stop the recording.